This is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook, and I'm here with my great colleague, Bec Guild. Bec, how are you?
Good, thank you. How about you?
Good. Well, now we're at the 8th BioCeuticals Research Symposium last weekend.
Day 7.
The Saturday, the 27th. Oh, my goodness. We've just heard Datis again. Second plenary. Okay, the big lesson is come caffeined up.
Yes, if you didn't learn that from the first session.
But you know, today was a little bit different because it seemed like we went back to review. And the thing that I realised within the first 15 minutes was A, how much I'd forgotten, and B, how much I didn't know. So I feel not just old and stupid, but stupid. Just stupid.
Well, maybe you've got neuroinflammation, as he so poignantly pointed out.
I had to pull out my Guyton's medical physiology to review. I was just, seriously, there was things that I've never heard of there.
Okay, like what things?
Well, the what is it, abdominal membrane. It's not in there.
These videos, if nothing else, they acutely highlight to me how different people pick up on different things. I can guarantee you, I did not hear that part.
It was like this protective membrane for the between the synapse and the actionable end plate, if you like. Right. I've got that wrong, but anyway, I can't find it in there. I can't find it in Mario. It's not there. I have to go back and look at it and find out where the heck is this? What is it exactly?
Probably
is it a different name?
Specialized
Well, is it basement membrane? You know, I don't know.
A specialized textbook perhaps, and one that's got some updated information in it too, because it's only as up to date as the last piece of research that went into it as well.
Absolutely. But, you know, again, the points that he was talking about, the M1 and M2 glial cells, and what I was thinking immediately was, well, hang on, how does this tie in with the M1 and M2 macrophages in the periphery? And of course they do.
Well, he did make
that connection. There's a tie in there.
He did sort of say that so today's session was all about how hormones impact the brain. And so a huge portion of that discussion was around glial cells and microglia in the brain. And of course, didn't he show some really fantastic videos showing how they move with their little finger-like projections around in the brain tissue? And he even went on to say that, you know, it's almost like a sci-fi movie is unraveling in your brain each and every moment of each day, which I thought was a bit cute.
Or is Bec? Star Trek's in mine.
Explains a lot. So yes, where you were saying that M1 and M2, he did say, you know, basically those glia cells are like the macrophages of the brain. They clean stuff up. They're the cleaning staff that come in and mop up things, but they're also very susceptible to damage, which is what pretty much that was my take-home message, that the glia are so important.
Yeah, absolutely, and so much more than glue. You know,
70%.
What I learned.
70% of the weight of the brain, he was saying, is glia cells.
Absolutely, and there's so many actions with, you know, synaptic pruning, with, you know, uses in plasticity and things like that. So if you get this priming, and this was a really interesting thing to me, you can get primed so early in your life, you know. Helmets when you're when you're riding bikes, anybody wearing bikes? But, you know, like, what did we do as kids? We never had helmets. My brother, wearing a helmet, has a mild traumatic brain injury from heading off into a tree because he's got a finger caught on the string of the backpack string of a cello as she rode past in her bike. And he's off, and he's got a TBI because of that. Yeah. What about the priming of that? Yeah. You know, with food, just amazing.
What I wrote down about the injury side of things, like a traumatic brain injury, was that it's not so much the response or the level of damage the injury itself does, but your ability to respond, which was primarily mediated by hormone health estrogen for women, testosterone for men, thyroid hormone for everybody. Like that if you've got really good adequate levels of these hormones, your ability to respond and repair to a spinal or a head injury is just that much better. For sure I wrote that down.
Yeah, but when I was putting all of this, trying to put it into a framework, and I was thinking, okay, well, where along the timeline do you see a patient, and what can they do earlier on, excuse me, to make sure that they're in the best of health? We know about dietary interventions, and I guess this is one great area where, David Perlmutter's lessons about avoiding grains, particularly wheat, comes into play. And he's got a new book out. What is it? Brainwash. Grain brain? Forgive me? Brainwashed. That's brainwash, yeah.
Brainwash. For brain. It's actually the latest FX Medicine podcast. So that's up on FX Medicine if anyone wants to watch it. Listen to it.
Yeah, excuse me clearing my throat, everybody. So just where along the timeline do you intercede? Because we often see a patient here and they've had things happening here. Yep. So how do you get the message to them? And I was thinking about, dietary stuff, the old lessons that we bang on about all the time about stress management, mindfulness, taking 3 breaths, really simple things that we can do. Forgive me, good amounts of exercise, stress expression.
Yep.
All of these really simple things that we think, it's okay, it's a lifestyle thing. How important it is to make sure that you're preventing neuroinflammation should something like a TBI happen.
Yes, and also to highlight why it should just be something we adopt into daily practice. I mean, I know that there's studies on this, but, if they put mindfulness, meditation and breathing practices into schools, that correlates with an impact in behavior and learning outcomes. And, the kids themselves have a better sense of well-being. Yeah. So we should be teaching this to children to try and set them up so that if they've got, this happening in their future, if they're going to go on to be a professional rugby player or they're going to go and join the military or whatever they might be, that they're at risk of a brain injury, well, this would set them up to have not only the facilities at their disposal to help with their own well-being, but that it'll set them up to recover and recuperate better if they were, had an injury.
It ties in with what Carrie Jones is going to be talking about tomorrow, because I've podcasted with her on this, and that's resilience. And there's such a focus that we need to regain on this. Well, I think we've lost it, and that is to teach our kids resilience in so many ways.
Absolutely.
Not just doing things for themselves, but also this emotional resilience.
Yeah.
And I think it's so important.
The cortisol awakening response, when I listened to that podcast, and in a similar way to just about every speaker that we've heard from so far, it's really highlighted to me how much we probably need to direct our questioning in the consultation process to unravel and unlayer these things. Like with cortisol awakening response, how do you feel when you wake up? Are you feeling refreshed?
How do you feel after a meal?
Yeah, and Datis talked about that today as well. Are you tired after a meal? Are you refreshed after a meal? Does it make you feel worse? Do you concentrate better? How do you feel when you get up and get going in the morning? And, some of these connections with things like sleep apnea and inflammation, and, it's sort of, there's a lot of dots being connected for me across the last few weekends.
And the types of hunger as well. Like, is it hunger for sugary foods or carb-loaded foods, or is it just generalized hunger and something that you can stand and withhold? Is it morning hunger after a fast, breaking the fast?
Yeah.
And how late can we do that?
Yep.
Which is a real interesting thing about pushing through that initial hunger.
Yes.
To helping balance, sugar swings and things like that. What should we then break our fast with? There's so many aha moments that are going,
Yeah.
But now we've got the physiological consequences of what happens if you screw that up.
Yeah. Today has really highlighted for me, it's very important to understand how somebody is responding to foods and therefore blood sugar and or insulin resistance, like if they're hypo or hyperglycemic. That's an important thing to assess for a great many reasons. But, you know, obviously hormonal disorders, mood and cognitive disorders, I've now, you know, that's up at the top of my list. Some of his assessment techniques, I've also, you know, written down that the really cool thing about using the tongue depressor to check the movement of the soft palate at the back of the throat, and to
do it continually.
And so like sort of 10 or more times consecutive, to see how quick or that muscle would kind of tire out, and it can tell you a little bit about their vagal motor nuclei and the overall tone that's happening in terms of, like, obviously that peristaltic movement that happens all the way through the digestive tract. So that was really cool, you know, like we sometimes forget these simplistic assessment techniques. We can get caught up.
See, I've got a leftover thing here from my little bit of a bromance with Emrys Goldsworthy about that, because I remember when we spoke about vagal nerve stimulation, he spoke about depressing the tongue and doing the R motion to see if the uvula regressed, if you like, up into the palate. But the interesting thing I learnt today from Datis was doing it repeatedly and see if it fatigues.
Yes.
So that's along that sort of lines of the ptosis movement that you'd get with ME. You know, the drooping eyelids from blinking. And also what Datis covered in his previous talk about doing the finger talk and seeing if one fatigued, one side fatigued. So the real interesting is not just to do it, but to do it repeatedly and look for fatigue. That's the interesting thing that I picked up today.
And that these can be cues for us to look further. Like if you were starting to see some of those things, well, now if I was going to look at somebody and their ability to do that, and I could see there was a lag on one side to the other, I'd be sort of going, okay, we really need to understand if you're having some problems with, I mean, gluten's the obvious choice, but he has shown throughout both last week's lectures and this week that there's this protein molecular mimicry happening and cross-reactivity with certain foods. I know you've got that printed out there, so you could probably speak to that with a little bit more
I did a screen grab, so well, I looked at these foods on his slide and I went, quick screen grab. So it's as blurry as heck. In fact, if I take off my glasses, it's about the same. But you know, what I found was really interesting is when let's say you have a sensitivity or an allergy to one legume, like a peanut, that there's only really a 5% risk of having other issues with other legumes like peas, lentils or beans. Have a look at this though. 92%, if you've got a cow's milk problem, 92% issue that you're going to have a risk with goat's milk. Yeah. And yet goat's milk would be the go-to milk. Yeah. Here's something we never do in Australia. Cow's milk with mare's milk, 4%. Why aren't we drinking horse milk? I don't know what the tastes like, but anyway, camel's milk is probably
maybe
good.
There's a reason for that.
No, camel's milk is apparently really nutritious. I haven't tasted.
Yeah.
What was the other one?
Camel's milk
melon with other fruits.
Nutrient ratio in camel's milk. I'm not an expert on that, but I think it even has some interesting fat.
And one of the other ones is when you've got a problem with the initial fruits, if you're eating latex gloves, there's not really a problem. Oh, hang on, I think you're reading that wrong. I've got to do a little bit more thinking about that dietary choice.
But he did bring up some slides from his published journal article. Him and some of his colleagues had published some of that cross-reactivity stuff into a journal. And I was looking at, they were checking it against T3 and T4 thyroid hormones and checking the kind of cross-reactivity with certain food groups. And then there was, you know, some were really high and others were kind of low, and things that you probably wouldn't really think of. So I made a mental note, I'm going to have to go and grab that and print it out so that, you know, like, because Hashimoto's, how common is it? It's increasingly more common.
Yeah. So that, I mean, to me, that was interesting research. What I'd like to see is now you need to put that into patient practice, and you need to show that when you do that, you get benefits in, you know, because that was an ex vivo type thing with antibodies. So really interesting, but I think there's another step that we need to do to confirm it. What was one of the other ones that I thought, I got really confused about this. Insulin was pro-inflammatory. What? I thought insulin was anti-inflammatory. So maybe he did a typo there and he was talking about insulin resistance.
Yeah, what I think, what I took away from that is that, with insulin, I wrote that down as well. Where did I write that down? That it's insulin is a driver of inflammation in the brain. I did write that down as well. But we know, we've always known like hyperglycemia is a driver of inflammation. So I wonder if there's the relationship about, maybe it's not so much the presence of insulin, but the way it's not functioning. Yeah, and it's putting the glucose extracellular, which is setting off that cascade of, glycosylated and glycosylated related
age. End product.
Yeah. Obviously, I need another coffee. My neuroinflammation needs an assessment.
And one of the other points though as well was when he was talking about INOS, ENOS, and NNOS, and we always get caught on nitric oxide. And what can we do to make nitric oxide, like arginine, things like that, which is fraught with issues. I'm not a fan of arginine, certainly not alone, without at least carnitine. But the thing is, we get caught up on the compound. And when you look at that thing, it's inducible nitric oxide. What's the S for? Synthase. It's the enzyme. We keep forgetting about the enzymes, the importance of the enzymes. And whether they're damaging or restorative.
Where do they come from?
Mummy and daddy? What do you mean?
Well, nutrients. At the end of the day, they all come from some of our basic...
You mean the obvious question?
Vitamins and minerals, but also then go further down the chain. Where do they come from? They will come from often foods that contain enzymes, which we, as a Western society, we grossly consume very little.
Well, look, I mean, we can go into cellular health here as well. Just overall cellular health, endoplasmic reticulum, nuclear production, all of that sort of thing. So, I mean, there's so many things I've just got to review, and I've got to go, okay, where are these enzymes made? Like there was the 17, was it a beta lyase or something? And I'm going, whoa, too fast. Slide gone. Review.
Back to first year biochemistry, right back to this is the structure of the cell. This is where the mitochondria is and the Golgi apparatus and blah, blah, blah.
I pulled out Marieb. But I went back. I'm flicking through it. I've forgotten so much. Moving on, there was a couple of things that I got. There were so many things I got from his second talk, which was not a case history, but really a plan development. And the first tip, if you like, aha moment I got on there from him was that he didn't say protocol. I know the title was protocol, but what he kept on saying was developing a plan because each patient is different. Now we say this, but we constantly fall into the vernacular because it's easy to say the word protocol. How about we say the word plan? Just say the word plan instead.
Yeah.
Just that word.
Yeah, he had, at the end of it was these Hashimoto's guidelines, and he had them in, level 1, which was points.
Level 1 and level 2 care,
and level 2 below the line. And so above the line are all the things that typically are the reasons why people are seeking functional medicine practitioners. Diet, nutraceuticals, lifestyle, getting some coaching and some targeted approaches around how to implement those to improve health and well-being. They're the overlooked factors, the things that everyone thinks, that makes hardly any difference. And I can say for myself, if I tell somebody that, okay, you've got to incorporate some breathing techniques, or, that there's some cool stuff around, it's all the rage at the moment, the mouth breathing and the impact on the microbiome, and that you need diversity in your diet. And people are like, that's so hard. It's so hard.
Nose breathing, isn't it?
Yeah, but if you're a mouth breather, you've got to decrease diversity in your mucosal, your whole mucosal tract. So you impact the pH because it's drying out the membranes, and it's like another cascade.
I'm trying to increase my diversity here by shutting up and nose breathing.
That's not working out for you.
And what was one of the other things that I pulled out? And that hypothyroid patients tend to have a decreased bacterial diversity.
Yes.
Now, I'm sort of in a quandary here because, like, do you get a conformational bias when you're looking at for hypothyroid patients and you see a decreased bacterial diversity, but you haven't looked at at other people who haven't? Where's the comparison? How big is that comparison?
It's chicken or egg
culturally issues, Americans versus Australians versus Afghanistanians. There's so many issues there with bacterial diversity.
The thyroid issue or the intestinal permeability?
First.
Because we'll perpetuate the other, as we've learned all for both of Datis's sessions.
Yeah, and you just mentioned, intestinal permeability, and how often do we just come full circle and go right back to the gut? Now, I'm not saying it's necessarily the trigger. There might be a TBI or something like that as the trigger, and there's that misnomer to say it's the cause of all disease. I don't believe that it's the cause, but jeepers, that it's an important driver.
Yeah, I was really glad actually to see that part of his approach to this was there was that little thing that he said about oral tolerance, and that one of the strategies he uses is to get his patients to get 20 or so different vegetables, whiz them up in a food processor and have a couple of spoons of that every day to just increase that plant diversity, which in turn increases microbial diversity.
Yes, can't wait to do that with Brussels sprouts and lettuce. I actually love my Brussels sprouts, and yes, I can eat broccoli raw.
This is one of the things I really love about Helen Patteran's approach with the diet, is the 9v9, so 9 cups of vegetables every day. I mean, put your hand up if you're getting 9 cups of vegetables every day. Probably not.
It's coffee.
Vegetable juice there, is it?
I'm trying to stay awake. but going along that intestinal permeability issue and what we can do, and that we've got to keep that diversity, even though there might be that issue of cross-reactivity. It's really important.
Definitely.
At least on that level 1 care, that we increase the diversity. And if required, then you might have to do some real serious investigation. The lesson for me was, I don't consider myself an expert in this at all. And indeed, if I got somebody with Hashimoto's, I would be doing level 1 care and maybe broaching the topic of the level 2 care. But for me, it's not my area of calling. I would be sending them away. I would be referring them on to somebody who is a specialist in that area and who can effectively do that level 2 care. And, just these lessons about practice and keeping somebody well. One of the other big lessons was how he mentioned nutraceuticals in level 1 care, but one of the nutraceuticals we've got to be really, really careful of, more careful than what I thought, is iodine. Now, I thought giving up to, certainly the 150 micrograms, there was a few typos there today, by the way, but the 150 micrograms was certainly safe. Indeed, that's advocated with Australian guidelines for pregnant women. Now, how many of pregnant women have got Hashimoto's? Might they be overdoing that? What are we doing without selenium? And what about myo-inositol? That was a bang.
Yeah, myo-inositol. I mean, that just, for me, that's a trigger word lately. I feel like every time I'm reading anything, it's kind of popping up as a player that, almost needs to become one of those dispensary staples.
I think so. I really think so. It's really coming to the fore.
Yeah, I'm in agreement. But selenium. And the other one that was, he said was absolutely critical for Hashimoto's was vitamin D.
Yes, of course. And the number of gene SNPs that these people tend to have. So how much, he was advocating doses, 10,000, which I'm quite happy with. There is I'm
comfortable with
Reinhold Veith quotes this very well. There is no evidence to show that 10,000 IU will cause any toxicity. That's not ad nauseum. But But 50,000 IU per day, I'd be retesting.
Maybe short term.
Short term, I'd be doing it.
Yeah.
But I'd be doing a baseline and a test, or at least
I think absolutely.
And I'm not an advocate of over testing with vitamin D, because we've wasted millions of dollars over testing in vitamin D. But in those people who, you've got a reasonable suspicion that they are drastically deficient in vitamin D, or if you want to check that you're being safe with your higher dosing over a long period of time or a lengthened period of time, then yes, that's when testing is appropriate.
Yeah, testing, agreed. You can sort of start to uncover risk factors with vitamin D pretty simply through the consultation process. Those who are more olive in skin are typically those that will convert the D less readily than those with fairer skin. But then again, those with fairer skin are often more likely to cover up and, completely shade themselves from the sun.
And they're at high risk of skin cancers.
And they're at high risk of skin cancers. So, they'll tend to be low purely because they don't expose themselves readily enough. And so the sun safe thing, you always ask people about that. Definitely, are they susceptible to getting ill? I would call that a very good
recurrent respiratory infections.
Respiratory stuff, it seems to be rife with it. And what does Michael Holick say? Is it that the sweaty heads of the babies? I mean, you could talk to every second mother.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Sweating heads above the forehead.
Yeah.
Forehead. That was a real interesting. I remember him talking about it, but I don't remember any physiology behind it. Why there? Why not there? Now, what was the other one? One of the other things I pulled out, and I thought, sorry, but I didn't. I got a really excited brain moment here, because when Datis was talking about lectins and gluten avoidance and then avoidance of other lectins. And I thought, hang on, when you're talking about keeping this plant diversity there, and when you're talking about the issue with lectins, which are not just in beans and legumes, but in many, many plant foods, how do we sensibly avoid those lectins? And I thought, okay, given that most people either won't or can't avoid vegetables or shouldn't, can we give them something that might have the ability to bind to these lectins? And after looking, I did a brief, quick look in between the talk and now, and what came up was oligosaccharides. And when I looked at the oligosaccharides, there was mannose was the major one. Henry Osiki, anybody? Hello, way ahead of his time, that man. But the other one was fucose. And where are these oligosaccharides found? Aloe vera. And I was just thinking, we go back to the gut. What about giving some aloe vera, slippery elm, glutamine, some nice soothing nutrients for the gut, rabinogalactans.
These things that fall out of favor as we, try and create these super powered products to perform these functions. But yes, we can go and still keep in place these really simple things. I mean, aloe is one of the simplest, but sometimes there can be some compliance issues. Like I know some people don't love the taste of it, but if they just gave it a try for 5 to 7 days, I think that they would notice the difference of how it makes them feel.
Yeah, and you can mask the taste reasonably. Like sometimes, anyway. But just these really simple and, might I say, gut-related things that if we're talking about immune priming and then priming the macrophages to instead of going to M1, the pro-inflammatory macrophage, to M2, the anti-inflammatory, or should I say the balance, so you have tolerance, and then that will decrease this translocation to the through the blood-brain barrier, so that you avoid the M1 glial cells.
Microglia.
Microglia, yes. And I just think, back to the gut we go. To the gut we go.
And you definitely
stewed apples. Mark Donoghue. Stewed apples.
Michael Ash.
I had to.
And again, I think I've said this every week, but when something is illustrated in a very visual representation, like now I understand when he says microglial activation to these inflammatory states. And, you know, you've watched a video where they've turned from these little finger-like projections that can maneuver around on a within the brain to a blob that cannot move. It's like it's had its legs cut off. That's the power of inflammation, and that, you know, that needs to be a focus of the therapy. So he was talking about curcumin, I think. Black cumin.
Yeah, so that was when you're talking about the 5 stars and the 4 stars, the nutraceuticals.
That was interesting.
That was really interesting.
Yeah, he kind of ranked the
put it this way, everybody watching, there's a lot to learn.
Yeah, there's a lot to learn. Resources, lots of like really practical resources that, you know, you can take today and implement with your patients from, you know, Monday.
Rereading.
I filled up half a notebook.
And half finished notes, I might add.
Yeah.
Half finished notes. God, he talks fast.
He does. I had 2 little things that were aha moments for me. Like for anyone who follows me on Facebook, they would have seen a couple of weeks ago, and you and I were talking about this as well. I was looking for distal sites that drive estrogen production for, you know, cases of estrogen dominance where maybe, you know, we can't say that the reproductive system was at fault. And how interesting that he validated the study that I shared with you and onto my Facebook page, but that the glia cells in women will produce estradiol, and that did you find it in there?
And it's not in there.
Not in there. Okay.
Nope. No. I'm going to have to look up one of my other favorite books up there, Leninger Biochemistry.
Is it a 2020 edition? Like how many times in the last 2 to 3 years I've seen something posted by one of the many websites that I've found, and a new structure has been found, like the one in the lymphatic system. There's something else as well. And the thing is, it means we have to rewrite our understanding of the textbook. So we only know what we know until we work out new stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. But like, I won't be surprised if that Leninger, where am I going with the video? That Leninger there doesn't have it in there, but I'll be certainly looking up a new Leninger. I'll be certainly seeing what's online, that's for sure. I mean, it's just so interesting. We know that our, discoveries move faster than print. You know, by the time a text is printed, it's already out of date. I get it. But there should be these things, you would hope, that we think should be known in the endocrinological world. I hope I said endocrinological the right way.
Oh, you did.
The emphasis on the right syllable.
Yes, but, totally correct. The coffee's obviously kicked in.
but you know, one of the other things that I got from watching and listening to Datis is that he answered a lot of the physiological questions I had from last year's symposium with Dale Bredesen. So you know, the M1 and M2 switching, the reason why iodine should be avoided in Hashimoto's. I've heard it. I've heard it so many times. Nobody's given me the reason and backed it up with science to show there you are.
Yeah, that was comprehensive today. I'm with you there. A lot of people are like, oh, I'm a bit hesitant about using iodine in Hashimoto's, but I'd never really been given a very fulfilling answer on it. So he's done that today. It's illustrated it perfectly.
Well, medically, it's been contraindicated, and you know, you can't contraindicate a vital nutrient. You've got to have some, but low. Don't be very cautious about supplementing.
And even be mindful of diet.
Again, selenium comes to the rescue.
Selenium, and none of us get enough of it. And magnesium was the other nutrient I think that got a rank dimension there as well. Yeah, another one we're all really low in.
I got a question though. I got a question, and I don't think it was asked in the question time, and that was, what about the forms of selenium? Because you're entering enzyme pools or not with selenomethionine versus sodium selenite. So there you go. There's a post-question thing.
Now, we've probably talked for ages. We probably need to... Well, yes, the panel tomorrow. Should we cover that?
Yes. Yes.
So, we'll wrap up now because not paid attention to how long we've been talking for. Sorry about that. Tomorrow we have Dr. Carrie Jones.
Rabbit on for hours.
Delving back into the cortisol awakening response and how that's a marker for health. And she will have a case study that shows or that illustrates this for us. And then in the afternoon, we have the panel discussion. So we will have Datis, Carrie, Lara, Amanda, Amy, and Mark all together in one screen where they're going to answer their questions. So for those who have had their questions, make sure you email them through to the team at BioCeuticals so that you get your question asked on the day. And remember that we will have this available in early July so that it can be watched back for FX Medicine viewers.
Great. So to end the day, this is FX Medicine. I'm Andrew Whitfield Cook with my colleague Bec Gill.
We'll see you tomorrow.